I never thought I'd be sitting alone on Christmas night, scrolling through old family photos with tears streaming down my face. But that's exactly where I found myself last year, after what should have been a joyful family gathering turned into the most humiliating experience of my adult life. Let me take you back to the beginning. I'm Emma, a 27-year-old single woman who's always been the cool aunt in the family. I work as a graphic designer for a small marketing agency. It's creative and fulfilling, but definitely not making me rich. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment, drive a used car with questionable reliability, and occasionally worry about my student loans. But I've always been independent and proud of carving my own path, even if it's not the conventional route my family expected. 3 years ago, my older brother James called me in a panic. He and his wife Melissa had always lived somewhat beyond their means. The big house in the suburbs, luxury cars, designer clothes for the whole family, and most importantly, the prestigious Westlake Academy for their only son, my nephew Tyler. James's voice cracked as he explained that his company was downsizing. He'd been let go with a modest severance package, but not nearly enough to maintain their lifestyle, while he searched for a new position. "It's Tyler I'm worried about most," he confessed. "He's finally thriving at Westlake. The teachers understand him there. If we pull him out now and put him in public school, he couldn't even finish the sentence." I had always been close to Tyler, despite our relatively small age gap of only 11 years. I was 16 when he was born, and I'd been more like a big sister than an aunt to him growing up. I taught him to skateboard, introduced him to all the best music, and was the one he texted when he needed advice his parents wouldn't understand. Even as he entered his teenage years and developed that typical adolescent attitude, there remained an underlying bond between us. At least, I thought there was. That night after James's call, I looked at my finances. While most of my friends were splurging on trendy apartments and weekend getaways, I had been saving diligently since college, partly for eventually buying a home, partly for pursuing a master's degree in design. I had nearly $75,000 set aside. Westlake Academy cost $24,000 per year. Tyler had 5 years left until graduation. The math wasn't ideal, but it was doable if I continued living frugally and picked up freelance work on the side. "I'll cover Tyler's tuition until you get back on your feet," I told James the next day. My brother, 10 years my senior and always the responsible one in the family, broke down in gratitude. He promised he'd pay me back as soon as possible. We agreed not to tell Tyler the truth. He'd be told a scholarship had come through. I didn't want him to feel awkward around me, and honestly, I wasn't looking for his gratitude. Seeing him continue to thrive and have opportunities I never had was enough for me. For 3 years, I kept my promise. Each semester, I transferred the tuition money directly to the school. It meant significant changes to my already modest lifestyle. No more small indulgences like concert tickets or weekend trips with friends, picking up exhausting freelance projects on evenings and weekends, and saying goodbye to my master's degree dreams for the foreseeable future. But whenever I saw Tyler's academic achievements or heard him talk excitedly about his school activities, it felt worth it. James did eventually find another job, but at a significantly lower salary. He and Melissa downsized their home and made other cutbacks, but they were still struggling to rebuild their finances. The unspoken arrangement continued. I kept paying Tyler's tuition, semester after semester, without complaint. Over those 3 years, I noticed subtle changes in Tyler. He had always been somewhat entitled, a product of his upbringing and affluence, but now it seemed amplified. On the rare occasions he visited my apartment, he made little comments about the neighborhood or my basic furniture. When I couldn't afford to buy him the expensive birthday gifts his parents gave him, his thanks seemed perfunctory at best. Still, I chalked it up to normal teenage self-centeredness. He was 16 now, and I remembered my own embarrassing lack of awareness at that age. I still saw glimpses of the sweet kid I'd always loved, like when he asked for my opinion on his graphic design project, proudly showing interest in my field, or when he texted me late at night worried about friend drama. Those moments kept me going, reminding me why I'd made this sacrifice in the first place. The Christmas dinner had been planned for months. My sister was hosting all 20 of us. siblings, spouses, children, our aging parents, and even a few aunts and uncles in her spacious home. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, a bright spot in what had been a particularly tight financial month after an emergency car repair drained my checking account. I'd spent hours making homemade gifts, custom digital illustrations for everyone, printed and framed at a budget shop, since store-bought presents weren't in my budget this year. As I pulled up to my sister's house in my 12-year-old Corolla that made concerning noises on cold starts, I noticed James's new SUV in the driveway. A twinge of something, not quite resentment, but perhaps confusion, passed through me. He'd mentioned a year-end bonus that had allowed them to upgrade their vehicle, but hadn't mentioned anything about resuming Tyler's tuition payments. I pushed the thought aside. It was Christmas, after all. Time for joy, not financial accounting. The house was warm and festive, filled with delicious smells and the sound of laughter. I spotted Tyler immediately, taller than when I'd last seen him 2 months ago, sporting an expensive-looking watch and designer clothes. He gave me a quick side hug before returning to his cousins, barely maintaining eye contact. I placed my handmade gifts under the tree, feeling suddenly self-conscious about their simplicity compared to the professionally wrapped boxes with designer labels. Little did I know that in just a few hours, that self-consciousness would transform into complete humiliation, and the comfortable family dynamics I'd known for decades would shatter like a fragile ornament dropped on hardwood floor. That evening held a lesson for all of us, about gratitude, awareness, consequences, and ultimately forgiveness, though the path to that lesson would first lead through one of the most painful experiences of my life. And as I sat alone that Christmas night, I had no idea that my next decision would change everything. The invitation to Christmas dinner had arrived in my inbox 6 weeks earlier, a cheerful email from my sister Catherine with "Family Christmas Extravaganza" in the subject line. Catherine, the eldest of us, 4 siblings, had always been the family organizer, the one who maintained traditions and ensured we all stayed connected despite busy lives and growing families. Emma, Christmas at my place this year, the 25th of December, 2 p.m. The whole family will be there. Mom and Dad are flying in. Uncle Rob and Aunt Jean confirmed. Cousins with their kids. Everyone. It's been too long since we've all been together. No excuses. Love you, P.S. We're doing the usual Secret Santa, $50 limit, I'll send your person next week. I'd smiled at her enthusiasm, marked my calendar, and then felt a twinge of anxiety about the $50 Secret Santa. That was before my car had decided to break down, requiring nearly $800 in repairs I hadn't budgeted for. Still, I was genuinely excited about seeing everyone. Despite our differences, I loved my family fiercely. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, I found myself working late into the night on freelance projects, trying to build a small cushion in my bank account for January. My regular job had been slower than usual, with clients pushing projects to the new year, and my next student loan payment loomed on the horizon. The extra work meant I was exhausted, surviving on too much coffee and too little sleep, but I was determined to enter the holiday with at least some financial breathing room. My Secret Santa assignment turned out to be my 14-year-old niece, Catherine's daughter Zoe. I spent hours creating a custom digital illustration of her with her favorite band, designing it so it could be printed as both a framed piece and on a t-shirt. The printing and framing kept me under the $50 limit, and I was genuinely proud of how it turned out. For everyone else, I created simpler, personalized illustrations. My mom with her beloved garden, my dad with his vintage car, my siblings with elements that captured their personalities. They weren't expensive gifts, but they represented hours of thought and effort. The week before Christmas, I received a group text from James. "Tyler made the honor roll again. Celebrating at Castellano's tonight. Wish you could join us, but we know you're busy. Maybe next time." Attached was a photo of Tyler, James, and Melissa smiling at an upscale restaurant I could never afford, champagne glasses raised in celebration. I texted back my congratulations, genuinely happy for Tyler, but confused by the "we know you're busy" comment. I hadn't been invited in the first place. 3 days before Christmas, my apartment building's heating system failed. With temperatures dropping into the 20s, I spent 2 nights huddled under every blanket I owned, wearing multiple layers of clothing. The property management company finally fixed it on Christmas Eve, apologizing profusely but offering no compensation for the frigid days. I'd been too cold and too tired to finish wrapping my homemade gifts, so I stayed up late on Christmas Eve, carefully packaging each illustration in simple brown paper decorated with hand-drawn designs, adding small, personalized notes. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. I allowed myself the luxury of sleeping until 9 a.m., a rare treat, before starting my day with a cup of strong coffee and a video call with my closest friend Nadia, who had moved to Seattle the previous year. She was the only person who knew about my financial arrangement with Tyler's school, having been my roommate when I made the decision 3 years ago. "Are you sure you're okay with continuing to pay?" she'd asked me more than once. James and Melissa seemed to be back on their feet. "That SUV they bought isn't exactly a budget vehicle." "It's complicated," I'd always respond. "They're still catching up on debt they accumulated when James was unemployed. And anyway, it's only 2 more years until Tyler graduates. I've made it this far." The truth was, I'd begun to question my decision in recent months. Not because I regretted helping Tyler. I would always prioritize his education and opportunities, but because the financial strain was taking a greater toll than I'd anticipated. At 27, I was watching friends advance in their careers, buy homes, travel, start families. Meanwhile, I was living paycheck to paycheck, putting my own dreams on indefinite hold. Still, I reminded myself, family comes first. That's how we were raised. I arrived at Catherine's house at exactly 2 p.m., arms full of my simply wrapped gifts. The driveway was already crowded with vehicles: my parents' rental car, James's new SUV, our brother Michael's practical family minivan, and several others belonging to extended family. Catherine's home was in an upscale neighborhood, her husband David's success as a surgeon evident in the sprawling 2-story colonial with its manicured lawn and professional holiday decorations. Standing on the porch, I took a deep breath. Despite my financial struggles and exhaustion, I was determined to enjoy this day with my family. I plastered on my brightest smile and rang the doorbell. Catherine flung the door open, her face flushed with holiday cheer, and perhaps a glass or two of pre-dinner wine. "Emma, finally! Everyone's here!" She pulled me into a tight hug, the scent of her expensive perfume enveloping me. "You look tired, sweetie. Working too hard?" Before I could respond, she ushered me inside. The house was a picture from a holiday magazine. A massive tree glittering with coordinated ornaments, garlands draped perfectly along the staircase, the air filled with the scent of pine, cinnamon, and roasting turkey. Instrumental Christmas music played softly in the background, nearly drowned out by the sound of conversation and laughter from the crowded living room. My entrance caused a momentary pause as family members turned to greet me. My parents rushed over first, Mom fussing over my too thin appearance while Dad gave me his characteristic bone-crushing hug. Michael and his wife waved from across the room where they were wrangling their toddler twins. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins called out greetings. And then there was James, Melissa, and Tyler, clustered near the fireplace with drinks in hand. James raised his glass in greeting but made no move to come over. Melissa offered a tight smile and a small wave. Tyler glanced up briefly from his phone, gave a barely perceptible nod, then returned his attention to the screen. The contrast between their lukewarm acknowledgement and the enthusiastic greetings from the rest of the family wasn't lost on me, but I pushed the observation aside. "Let me take those gifts," Catherine said, reaching for the packages in my arms. "Drinks are in the kitchen, dinner in an hour, go mingle." I made my way around the room, catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in months, or, in some cases, years. I dodged the usual questions about my love life. Still single? At your age? And career progress. Graphic design is like making logos, right? Is there really a future in that? I complimented new hairstyles, admired photos of vacations I couldn't afford, and listened to detailed accounts of promotions, house renovations, and children's accomplishments. Throughout it all, I couldn't help noticing the divide between my reality and theirs. My cousin bragged about the Caribbean cruise they'd booked for February. My aunt described the extensive remodel of their kitchen. Catherine's husband David showed off his new golf clubs, custom-fitted at some exclusive pro shop. Even my parents, retired teachers with modest pensions, had splurged on a luxury river cruise through Europe for their upcoming anniversary. And then there was me, who had agonized over spending $10 on a bottle of wine to bring tonight, who had been surviving on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches for the past week to stretch my grocery budget, who had turned down every holiday party invitation from friends because I couldn't afford the secret Santa exchanges or restaurant bills. I found myself gravitating toward the kids' table, where my nieces and nephews were engaged in a heated debate about some new video game. They welcomed me easily, no questions about my career trajectory or romantic prospects. For a brief moment, I felt the tension in my shoulders release. That's when I heard Melissa's voice from nearby, speaking to my Aunt Jean, but loud enough to carry. "We're thinking of the Maldives for spring break. Tyler's never been, and James says the scuba diving is incredible. The resort is ridiculously expensive, but life's short, right?" I felt something twist in my stomach. The Maldives? While I was eating ramen to afford their son's tuition? Before I could process this, Catherine announced that dinner was ready. We all moved toward the formal dining room, where a table had been extended to accommodate all 20 of us. Name cards marked our places. Catherine's attention to detail was legendary, and I found myself seated between my mother and Tyler, with James and Melissa directly across. As I took my seat, I had no idea that the carefully arranged seating chart would become the stage for my public humiliation. No idea that in less than an hour, the festive atmosphere would shatter, along with my relationship with my nephew. No idea that the secret I'd kept for 3 years was about to explode into the open in the worst possible way. I smoothed my napkin across my lap, accepted the bowl of mashed potatoes, passed my way, and smiled at a joke my father made from the head of the table. Christmas dinner was officially beginning, and with it, the countdown to the moment that would change everything. The first hour of dinner progressed pleasantly enough on the surface. Catherine's turkey was perfectly roasted, the side dishes abundant, and the wine flowing freely. Except for me, I'd limited myself to 1 glass, knowing I couldn't afford a rideshare if I couldn't drive myself home. Conversation bounced around the table, from politics, quickly redirected by my diplomatic father, to neighborhood gossip to reminiscences of holidays past. I was making a conscious effort to engage with Tyler beside me, despite his obvious preference for his phone under the table. At 16, he'd grown into a handsome young man, with his father's strong jaw and his mother's expressive eyes. His private school uniform had been replaced today with designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire outfit. "So, how's school going? I heard you made honor roll again." "That's awesome," I said, genuinely proud of his achievement. Tyler glanced up briefly. "It's whatever, not that hard." His fingers continued tapping on his phone screen. "Any favorite subjects this year? Last time we talked, you were really into that graphic design elective." I tried again, hoping to connect over our shared interest. "It's fine. The software they have us using is pretty basic, though. Nothing like what the professionals use." There was something dismissive in his tone that stung slightly, but I pressed on. "Well, if you ever want to try the pro software, you could come over sometime. I have the full Adobe suite for my freelance work. I could show you some tricks." Tyler finally looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something else. "Was it disdain? At your place? On your ancient computer?" He gave a short laugh before returning to his phone. I felt my cheeks warm slightly but forced a smile. "It's not that ancient. 4 years old is practically new in my world." "If you say so." His attention was completely gone now, absorbed in whatever was happening on his screen. Across the table, I noticed Melissa watching our interaction, a small frown on her perfectly made-up face. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, turning to engage my aunt in conversation about her recent kitchen renovation. I turned instead to my mother on my other side, who was eager to show me photos of the garden club's Christmas decorating contest she'd helped judge. As I admired the elaborate light displays and creative themes, I felt rather than saw Tyler shift away from me slightly, creating additional physical distance between us. The first real moment of tension came when Catherine's husband David began discussing their recent vacation to Aspen. The powder was absolutely perfect, he enthused, cutting into his third helping of turkey. Best early season conditions they've had in years. We're already booked to go back in February. We should all plan a family ski trip, my mother suggested brightly. Wouldn't that be wonderful? All of us together on the slopes? There was a chorus of enthusiastic agreement around the table. I remained silent, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. A ski vacation was so far outside my financial reality, it might as well have been a trip to the moon. Emma, you ski, don't you? My Uncle Rob asked, drawing unwanted attention my way. I used to, I replied carefully. It's been a few years, though. Well, it's like riding a bike, David laughed. You never really forget. We could start you on the intermediate runs and you'd be back on the Black Diamonds by day 2. I smiled noncommittally, hoping the conversation would move on. It didn't. So you'll join us, my mother pressed. We could look at dates right after dinner. I took a sip of water, buying time. Around me, family members were already enthusiastically discussing possible resorts and comparing schedules. I could feel the expectation building, all eyes gradually turning toward me for an answer. I don't think I can this year, I finally said. Work is really busy, and I've got some financial commitments that make it difficult to budget for something like that right now. An awkward silence fell over the table. I could read the thoughts on their faces. What financial commitments could a single 27-year-old possibly have that were so important? Why couldn't I prioritize family time? Was I being difficult on purpose? What financial commitments? Tyler suddenly asked, looking up from his phone with new interest. It's not like you have kids or a mortgage or anything. Tyler, James said, his tone carrying a warning, but lacking real conviction. No, I'm just curious, Tyler continued, his eyes now fixed on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Aunt Emma's always too busy or too broke to do anything fun with the family. I just wonder what's so important. The table fell uncomfortably silent. I could feel heat rising to my face, aware of 20 pairs of eyes watching this exchange. I have responsibilities, I said carefully. Just because they're different from everyone else's doesn't make them less valid. Tyler rolled his eyes dramatically. Like what? Your rent on that tiny apartment? Your ancient car? Each word felt like a small arrow. My dad says people who are always broke just don't know how to manage their money properly. Tyler! Melissa hissed, shooting a glare at James, who suddenly seemed very interested in his wine glass. Did you say that, James? I asked quietly, looking directly at my brother for the first time that evening. James shifted uncomfortably. Not exactly like that. I just mentioned that sometimes people need to prioritize better, make smarter choices. I see, I said, working to keep my voice steady. The irony was almost physically painful. For 3 years, I'd prioritized Tyler's education over every aspect of my own financial well-being. And here was his father, suggesting I was financially irresponsible. Can we please talk about something else? Catherine interjected brightly. Mom, tell everyone about the cruise you and Dad are taking. The conversation reluctantly shifted, but I could feel a new tension humming around the table. Tyler had returned to his phone, but I noticed him occasionally glancing at me with what seemed like smug satisfaction. Melissa was studiously avoiding eye contact with anyone, while James was now on his 3rd glass of wine. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. In the hallway bathroom, I splashed cool water on my face and took several deep breaths. It's just one dinner, I whispered to my reflection. You can get through this. Don't let them see you upset. When I returned to the table, dessert was being served, Catherine's famous apple pie and homemade ice cream. Conversation had moved on to New Year's resolutions, with everyone taking turns sharing their goals for the coming year. I'm finally going to renovate the master bathroom, my aunt declared. We're focusing on college visits for our eldest, my cousin shared. David and I are planning to buy that vacation cabin in the mountains, Catherine announced. When it came to my turn, I kept it simple. I'm hoping to build my client list and maybe take a few professional development courses. That's it? Tyler asked incredulously. Not very ambitious. Tyler, James said again, but with even less conviction than before. No, I'm serious, Tyler continued, turning to face me fully now. Everyone else has these big plans, and Aunt Emma just wants to build her client list? He mimicked my voice in a way that made me sound pathetic and small. I felt something inside me beginning to crack, the careful wall I'd built around my resentment, my exhaustion, my growing sense that my sacrifice was neither recognized nor appreciated. But I held firm, reminding myself of why I'd made this choice in the first place. Sometimes, I said evenly, the most ambitious thing you can do is stay the course when it's difficult. Tyler's expression shifted from mockery to something closer to contempt. That sounds like something people say when they're too scared to make real changes, or too broke to have options. The table fell silent again. This time, the tension was palpable, a living thing that seemed to pulse in the spaces between us. I could see my mother's distress, my father's confusion, Catherine's growing alarm, but it was James's expression that caught and held my attention. Not anger or embarrassment on my behalf, but something that looked uncomfortably like pity. And that's when I realized, this dynamic wasn't new. This hadn't started tonight. For how long had they been discussing me this way in private? Poor Aunt Emma, who couldn't afford nice things, who lived in her tiny apartment, who drove her old car, who brought homemade gifts because she was too broke for real presents. How many eye rolls and condescending comments had been exchanged behind my back, even as my bank account was drained every semester to ensure Tyler could continue attending his prestigious private school. The realization sat like ice in my stomach. But worse was yet to come. A final, public humiliation that would push me past my breaking point and force a reckoning none of us were prepared for. As Catherine began collecting dessert plates and suggesting we move to the living room for the gift exchange, I had no idea that the true breaking point was just minutes away. No idea that Tyler's casual cruelty was about to escalate from uncomfortable jabs to devastating public ridicule. No idea that in less than 30 minutes, I would be sitting in my car, tears streaming down my face, making a decision that would change the course of all our lives. We migrated from the dining room to the living room, where Catherine's enormous Christmas tree dominated the space. Beneath it, gifts were arranged in meticulous piles, color-coded by recipient. The room buzzed with anticipation. Gift exchanges had always been a highlight of our family gatherings since we were children. I took a seat on the floor near the back of the room, partly to avoid being the center of attention after the uncomfortable dinner conversation, and partly because all the prime seating on couches and chairs had been claimed by older relatives and those quicker to position themselves. From my spot, I could see everyone's faces as Catherine began her annual ritual of playing Santa, distributing gifts one by one so each person could open their present while everyone watched. "Let's start with the Secret Santa gifts," she announced cheerfully, clearly relieved to move past the tension from dinner. "Remember, we reveal who had who after all gifts are opened." The mood lightened considerably as beautifully wrapped packages were handed out and opened to exclamations of delight. My niece Zoe squealed with joy at the custom illustration I'd created for her, immediately showing it off to her cousins. "This is so cool, Aunt Emma. It looks exactly like me. And you even got the band members perfect." Her genuine enthusiasm warmed my heart. This was why I'd spent hours on these gifts, these moments of connection and appreciation. When it was my turn, I carefully unwrapped a box to find an expensive-looking leather-bound planner with my initials embossed on the cover. It was beautiful and thoughtful, exactly what I needed for organizing my growing freelance work alongside my regular job. "That's from me," my sister-in-law Melissa admitted when all the Secret Santa gifts had been opened. "I know how busy you are with all your projects." I thanked her sincerely, wondering if perhaps I'd misjudged the situation. Maybe there was more awareness and empathy for my circumstances than I'd given them credit for. That brief moment of optimism was short-lived. As the gift opening continued, the divide between my reality and my family's became increasingly apparent. My parents received cruise excursion vouchers from my siblings. My brother Michael and his wife opened a gift certificate for a weekend at an exclusive spa resort. James and Melissa unwrapped a set of crystal wine glasses that I recognized from a high-end department store. When it came time for me to give my simple, handmade gifts, I felt a fresh wave of self-consciousness. The illustrations I'd created with such care now seemed inadequate, compared to the expensive presents being exchanged around me. Still, most recipients responded with genuine appreciation, complimenting my artistic skill and the personalized nature of each drawing. Then came Tyler's turn to open my gift to him. I'd spent extra time on his illustration, depicting him standing confidently at a design workstation, surrounded by elements representing his various interests and achievements. In the background, I'd included subtle symbols of growth and potential, a nod to the bright future I genuinely believed he had ahead of him, despite our recent strained interactions. Tyler unwrapped the package with obvious disinterest, barely glancing at the framed illustration before setting it aside without comment. "Do you like it?" I asked, unable to help myself. "I tried to capture your interest in design and—" "It's fine," he interrupted, already reaching for his next gift, an expensive-looking package from his parents. I felt a sharp pang of disappointment, but forced to smile, telling myself not to take it personally. He was 16 after all. Teenagers weren't known for their social grace. The gift exchange continued, and soon all the presents had been opened except for one small envelope that Catherine pulled from her pocket with a dramatic flourish. "This last one is special," she announced. "Mom and Dad, this is from all 4 of us kids. A little something extra for your anniversary trip." My heart sank. I had no idea about any group gift. No one had mentioned it to me or asked for a contribution. Our parents opened the envelope to find first-class upgrade vouchers for their upcoming river cruise. They were thrilled, embracing each of my siblings in turn while expressing their gratitude. "This was so thoughtful of all of you," my mother said, her eyes shining with happiness. "Actually," James said, glancing my way with what seemed like belated realization, "it was from the 3 of us. We, didn't want to burden Emma with the cost." An uncomfortable silence descended on the room. I felt every eye turn toward me, expressions ranging from pity to embarrassment on my behalf. "It was pretty expensive," Catherine added quickly, as if that explained everything. "We know you're watching your budget these days." "I would have contributed," I said quietly, hurt that they hadn't even given me the option. "You didn't even ask me." "Come on, Emma," James said with a forced laugh. "We all know you can barely make rent. We were trying to be considerate. Or money." "Tyler," Melissa cautioned, but her tone lacked conviction. "No, really," Tyler continued, warming to his subject. "Every time there's a family trip or event that costs money, Aunt Emma can't come. Every birthday or Christmas, she gives these." He gestured dismissively at the illustration I'd created for him. "Homemade things instead of real presents like everyone else." "Handmade gifts are thoughtful and personal," my father interjected, clearly trying to diffuse the situation. "They're what people give when they can't afford real gifts," Tyler shot back. "Everyone knows that." The room had gone completely still. No one seemed to know how to respond to this direct attack. I felt tears threatening, but blinked them back fiercely, determined not to break down in front of everyone. "Tyler, that's enough," James finally said. But there was a disturbing lack of authority in his voice. "What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Tyler persisted, now fully committed to his performance. "Aunt Emma's always talking about her career, but she lives in a crappy apartment and drives a car that's practically falling apart. And she's always too broke to do anything fun with the family." Each word landed like a physical blow. The worst part wasn't just the cruelty of his assessment, but the uncomfortable silence from the adults in the room. A silence that seemed to confirm that others shared his view, even if they were too polite to say it aloud. I looked at James, expecting, hoping, to see him put a definitive stop to this, but he was staring at his wine glass, his expression unreadable. "You know what?" Tyler continued, turning to address the entire room now. "I don't even get why she's so broke all the time. It's not like she has kids or a house or anything important to pay for. She probably just wastes all her money on stupid stuff." "That's not fair, Tyler," Catherine finally intervened, but her tone was more embarrassed than indignant. "It's true, though," Tyler insisted, emboldened by the lack of real opposition. "Dad says people who are always broke just make bad decisions. Right, Dad?" James looked up, caught between his son and his sister. "I didn't say that exactly." "Yes, you did," Tyler pressed. "You said some people just never figure out how to be good with money, and that's why they stay broke their whole lives." I felt something inside me break, a dam holding back 3 years of sacrifice, resentment, exhaustion, and hurt. Before I could stop myself, words were spilling out. "Is that what you think of me, James? That I'm broke because I make bad decisions? That I'm some financial failure you and Melissa laugh about behind my back?" James had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Emma, of course not," Tyler's exaggerating. "No, I'm not," Tyler insisted. "You guys literally talked about it last week. Mom said it was sad that Aunt Emma would probably never be able to buy a house or go on nice vacations because she's so bad with money." Melissa's face flushed crimson. "Tyler, that was a private conversation, and you're taking it completely out of context." But the damage was done. I looked around the room at my family, at their expensive clothes and talk of luxury vacations, at the pity in their eyes, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. 3 years of quietly sacrificing my own financial security, my own dreams, to ensure Tyler could continue his privileged education. And this was how they saw me. This was what they thought of me. This was what they said when I wasn't around. "Emma," my mother began, gently reaching toward me, "don't pay attention to." "I have to go," I said abruptly, rising to my feet. "I'm sorry. I need some air." "Don't be so sensitive," Tyler called after me as I headed for the door. "It's not my fault you're pathetic and broke." The room gasped collectively. Even Tyler seemed momentarily shocked by his own words, but recovered quickly, doubling down with a dismissive laugh. "Tyler!" James finally thundered, too late. I turned slowly, tears now freely streaming down my face, to face my nephew. Our eyes locked, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his expression, perhaps a realization that he'd gone too far. But then his gaze hardened, and he smirked at me, the cruel confidence of a teenager who believed himself untouchable. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and purse and walked out the front door, ignoring the chorus of voices calling after me. The last thing I heard as the door closed behind me was Tyler's derisive laugh, followed by his voice, loud and clear. "Drama queen much? It's just the truth." I made it to my car before completely breaking down. Great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being. 3 years of sacrifice, of putting someone else's future ahead of my own, and this was my reward: public humiliation and ridicule from the very person I'd given up so much to help. As I sat there, tears blurring my vision, a decision crystallized in my mind. Something had to change. This couldn't continue. I had reached my breaking point, and what came next would alter the course of all our lives. I don't remember the drive home from Catherine's house. My vision was blurred with tears, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I navigated the familiar streets on autopilot. Christmas lights blurred into streaks of color outside my window, holiday music playing softly on the radio, creating a surreal contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside me. By some miracle, I made it back to my apartment building without incident. I parked in my usual spot, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for several long minutes, staring unseeing at the dashboard. The events of the evening played on repeat in my mind. Tyler's cruel words, James's weak attempts at intervention, the uncomfortable silence from the rest of my family as I was publicly humiliated. "You're pathetic and broke." The words echoed in my head, each repetition like a physical blow. What hurt most wasn't just Tyler's cruelty. Teenagers can be thoughtless and cruel, I knew that. But the realization that this was how my entire family viewed me. The poor relation. The financial failure. The object of pity and private ridicule. All while I silently drained my savings account every semester to ensure Tyler could continue attending his prestigious private school. I finally dragged myself out of the car and up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. The heat was working again, at least, but the space felt especially small and shabby tonight, viewed through the lens of my family's apparent perception. My secondhand furniture, my outdated appliances, the water stain on the ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix, all of it seemed to confirm Tyler's assessment: pathetic and broke. My phone had been buzzing periodically since I left Catherine's house. I finally pulled it out to find multiple missed calls and text messages. From Mom: Emma, please call me. We're worried about you. From Catherine: Tyler was completely out of line. Please come back. We can talk about this. From James: Emma, I'm sorry about what happened. Tyler doesn't understand. Call me when you can. There were others, from my other brother Michael, from my father, even from my aunt, all expressing concern, all assuring me that Tyler was wrong, that no one thought of me that way. But noticeably absent was any message from Tyler himself. No apology, no recognition of the hurt he had caused. And James's message bothered me most of all. Tyler doesn't understand. What exactly didn't he understand? That his education was being funded by the aunt he had just publicly humiliated? That his comfortable lifestyle, his parents' new SUV, their luxury vacations, all of it was possible partly because I had shouldered a financial burden that should have been theirs? I tossed my phone onto the couch without responding to any of the messages and went to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator, stared at its meager contents. Some leftover pasta, half a carton of milk, a few eggs, and closed it again. I wasn't hungry. Instead, I opened the cabinet above the stove and pulled out the bottle of whiskey I kept for special occasions. Tonight certainly qualified, just not in the way I'd ever imagined. I poured myself a generous measure, moved to the window, and stared out at the city lights. Christmas decorations twinkled from neighboring apartments. Somewhere, families were still gathered around trees, opening presents, enjoying each other's company. And here I was, alone, publicly humiliated, 3 years into a financial sacrifice that had gone unacknowledged and unappreciated. The whiskey burned pleasantly as I took a long sip. I needed to think clearly, to decide what to do next. The path forward wasn't obvious, but one thing was clear: something had to change. I couldn't continue as I had been, not after tonight. My laptop sat on the small desk in the corner. I moved to it, opened a spreadsheet I kept meticulously updated. My budget, my savings, my expenses. The numbers told a stark story. 3 years ago, I'd had nearly $75,000 saved, the result of living frugally since college, taking on extra freelance work, investing carefully. It had been my security, my future, the down payment on a home someday perhaps, or the capital to start my own design studio, or the financial cushion to pursue that master's degree I'd always wanted. Now, the number was drastically smaller. Between the tuition payments for Tyler's school, $24,000 per year, the impact on my ability to take on additional work, exhaustion limits productivity, as I'd learned the hard way, and the missed opportunities for career advancement. I couldn't take risks when I had his tuition hanging over my head. My financial situation had deteriorated significantly. I had just under $8,000 left to my name. The reality of that number hit me like a physical blow. I'd known things were tight, of course. I lived that reality every day. But seeing the stark contrast between where I'd been and where I was now made me feel physically ill. At 27, I should have been building my future. Instead, I'd been quietly sacrificing it for someone who thought I was pathetic and broke. My phone buzzed again. James calling for the 3rd time. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the notification for a new message appeared. Emma, please call me. We need to talk about this. Tyler feels terrible. I almost laughed out loud at that. Tyler feels terrible? Not terrible enough to call or text me himself, apparently. Not terrible enough to apologize directly for the public humiliation he'd inflicted. I took another sip of whiskey and made a decision. I would call James, but not tonight. Not while the hurt was still so fresh. Not while I might say things in anger that I'd regret later. Tomorrow morning, when I'd had time to think, to process, to decide exactly what needed to be said. I closed the spreadsheet, shut my laptop, and moved to the bathroom. The face that stared back at me from the mirror looked tired, eyes red-rimmed from crying, expression drawn with stress and hurt. But there was something else there too, a determination that hadn't been present before. The woman in the mirror wasn't just hurt, she was angry. And she was done being taken advantage of. I showered, changed into pajamas, and crawled into bed, though I knew sleep would be elusive. As I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts circled back to the beginning, to that phone call from James 3 years ago, his voice breaking as he explained that they might have to pull Tyler from Westlake Academy, to my immediate, unquestioning offer of help, to the quiet pride I'd felt, knowing I was making a difference in my nephew's life. The irony was bitter. All this time, I'd believed I was helping to secure Tyler's future, to give him opportunities, to ensure his continued success. And all this time, apparently, he'd been absorbing his parents' judgment of me, their condescension, their belief that my financial struggles were the result of poor decisions rather than selfless sacrifice. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I finally drifted into a restless sleep, plagued by dreams in which I stood alone in Catherine's living room, while my family pointed and laughed, Tyler's voice loudest among them. Pathetic and broke, pathetic and broke. I woke at dawn, gritty-eyed and exhausted, but with absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. I reached for my phone and sent a brief text to James. "We need to talk. Come to my apartment at 10 a.m. Come alone." His response was almost immediate, suggesting he'd been awake and waiting for contact from me. "I'll be there. Emma, I'm so sorry about what happened." I didn't respond further. Apologies via text message were meaningless at this point. This conversation needed to happen face to face. I spent the next few hours in a strange, calm state of focus. I made coffee, showered, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater. I gathered financial documents. Bank statements, spreadsheets, the tuition payment receipts I'd kept meticulously. I arranged them neatly on my small dining table, a paper trail of 3 years of sacrifice. At exactly 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and went to answer it, knowing that the conversation I was about to have would forever change my relationship with my brother, my nephew, and possibly my entire family. James stood in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept much either. His hair was uncombed, his expression a mixture of concern and wariness. He held a paper bag from my favorite bakery, an obvious peace offering. "Emma," he began immediately, "I can't tell you how sorry I am about last night. What Tyler said was completely unacceptable, and believe me, he's been disciplined. He knows he was wrong." I stepped back to let him enter but didn't respond to his apology. I gestured toward the dining table, and he took a seat, placing the bakery bag in the center like a white flag. "I brought those almond croissants you like," he offered weakly. "I'm not hungry," I replied, taking the seat across from him. "And I didn't ask you here for croissants or apologies." James shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the documents spread across the table. "Emma, about last night." 3 years, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "For 3 years, I've been paying Tyler's tuition at Westlake Academy. $24,000 per year. $72,000 total so far." James's expression shifted from discomfort to shock. What? What are you talking about?" I pushed the tuition receipts toward him. "Don't pretend you don't know. We agreed to tell Tyler it was a scholarship, but you've known all along who was really paying for his education." James stared at the receipts, then back at me, his face draining of color. "Emma, I thought the school had actually given him a scholarship. That's what the administration told us after I called them about our financial situation. They said a special funding opportunity had become available and Tyler qualified. I had no idea. I never would have asked you to." I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, I felt my carefully constructed narrative begin to crumble. "You didn't know?" "No." James looked genuinely horrified. "Emma, how could you think I would let you do this? You're my little sister. I'm supposed to look out for you, not the other way around." "But the school said..." I began, then stopped as understanding dawned. "I called them. After you told me about potentially having to withdraw Tyler, I called the financial aid office directly. I set it up as an anonymous scholarship, but I specifically said not to tell the family who was funding it. They must have just followed my instructions. We sat in stunned silence for a moment, the revelation shifting the foundation of my hurt and anger. If James truly hadn't known, then his behavior, his comments about financial responsibility, took on a different meaning. Still insensitive, still hurtful, but not the deliberate cruelty I had attributed to him. "Emma," James finally said, his voice thick with emotion, "why would you do this? This is an enormous amount of money." "Because I love Tyler," I said simply. "Because you were desperate, and I had the means to help, and I wanted him to have every opportunity." "But your savings, your future." "Yes," I agreed, the hurt and anger surging back despite this new understanding. My savings, my future, my sacrifices. Also, Tyler could continue his privileged lifestyle and education, only to grow into someone who calls me pathetic and broke in front of our entire family. James winced visibly. "Emma, he had no idea. None of us did." What he said was inexcusable regardless, but he never knew what you were doing for him. "That's just it, James," I said, feeling tears threatening again but refusing to let them fall. "He didn't know because he never had to know. He's been insulated from financial reality his entire life. He's growing up believing that people who struggle financially are just making bad decisions. That's what you've taught him, apparently." James had the grace to look ashamed. "Those comments, they weren't about you specifically. I had no idea you were in financial difficulty. I thought your lifestyle was just a choice, that you preferred living simply while building your career." "It was a choice," I said quietly. "A choice to help your son. A choice you didn't even know I was making." We fell silent again, the weight of revelation and misunderstanding hanging heavy between us. Outside, I could hear Christmas music playing from a neighboring apartment, a cheerful counterpoint to the painful conversation unfolding in mine. Finally, James spoke, his voice unsteady. "What happens now?" It was the question I'd been asking myself all night, the question that had kept me awake until dawn. And despite the revelation that James hadn't knowingly taken advantage of me, my answer remained the same. "Now," I said firmly, "everything changes." "James, that's not non-negotiable," he interrupted firmly. "You've sacrificed enough. Second, Tyler will apologize to you, in person, sincerely, after he understands exactly what you've done for him. And finally, regardless of where he attends school going forward, he's going to start working part-time and contributing to his own expenses." The plan sounded reasonable, but I had my doubts. And if Westlake won't offer enough financial aid, are you really prepared to transfer him to public school? He's going to be resistant, especially if he knows I'm the reason. "Then that's a valuable lesson for him," James said with unexpected resolve. "Life doesn't always give us what we want just because we want it. Sometimes we have to adjust our expectations based on reality." I studied my brother's face, seeing a determination I hadn't witnessed in years. Perhaps this painful episode would ultimately lead to positive change for all of us. "There's one more thing," I said after a moment. "This isn't just about the money or even about what Tyler said last night. This is about our family dynamics going forward. I need to be respected, not pitied. I need my choices, including my choice to live simply while building my career, to be seen as valid, not as failures." "Absolutely," James agreed without hesitation. "And that starts with me. I owe you an apology for every thoughtless comment, every judgment, every time I failed to recognize your value beyond your financial status." He reached across the table, offering his hand. "I'm so sorry, Emma. Not just for last night, but for everything leading up to it. You deserved better from all of us, especially me." I hesitated briefly before taking his hand. The hurt was still fresh, the trust still damaged, but this was my brother. Despite everything, I loved him and wanted to believe in the possibility of repair. "So what now?" I asked. "Practically speaking, what's our next step?" "I'll call the school's financial aid office today," James said. Then Melissa and I will sit down with Tyler this afternoon and explain everything, your sacrifice, his behavior, and the changes that are coming. After that, he squeezed my hand gently. After that, it's up to you when and how you want to see him. I won't force a reconciliation before you're ready. I appreciated the acknowledgement that healing would take time. I think I'd like to be there, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. When you tell him, I think it's important that he hears it from me too, not just what I did, but why I did it, and how his words affected me. James looked surprised, but nodded. If you're sure, I think that would be powerful. Though I should warn you, teenage boys aren't known for their emotional maturity. His initial reaction might not be what you hope for. I'm not expecting a movie moment with tears and hugs, I assured him. I just want him to understand. The rest will come with time, hopefully. We spent the next hour outlining a plan. James would call the school immediately to understand the actual financial aid options available. Then he and Melissa would pick up Tyler from his friend's house, where he'd been banished for the day as initial punishment for his behavior, and bring him to my apartment at 4 p.m. Together, we would explain the situation and lay out the changes going forward. After James left, I found myself alone with swirling emotions, relief that the truth was finally out, lingering hurt from the public humiliation, uncertainty about how Tyler would react to learning about my sacrifice and its ending, hope that this painful episode might ultimately lead to positive growth for everyone involved. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching as families walked by outside, many carrying bags of Christmas gifts or dressed in holiday attire. Yesterday, their visible joy had been a painful contrast to my own misery. Today, I felt a cautious optimism taking root alongside the hurt. At 3:30, I straightened my apartment, not out of shame or embarrassment about its modest furnishings, but out of respect for the important conversation that would soon take place here. I arranged 4 chairs around the dining table, put on a fresh pot of coffee, and took a deep breath, preparing myself for what was to come. At precisely 4 p.m., my doorbell rang. I squared my shoulders, walked to the door, and opened it to find James, Melissa, and Tyler standing in the hallway. James and Melissa looked solemn. Tyler looked sullen and uncomfortable, his eyes downcast, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his expensive jeans. "Thank you for seeing us," Melissa said quietly. This was the first time I'd seen her since the disastrous dinner, and I could see that she'd been crying. "We're all here to listen." I stepped back to let them enter, noticing how Tyler hesitated at the threshold, seemingly reluctant to cross into my space. James placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder, guiding him inside with gentle insistence. As I closed the door behind them, I knew we were closing one chapter and opening another. What happened in the next hour would redefine our family relationships for years to come. The decision I'd made, to stop enabling, to demand respect, to prioritize my own financial future, felt right, despite the pain it had taken to reach it. "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the dining table. "We have a lot to talk about." We settled around my small dining table, James and Melissa on one side, Tyler across from his parents, and me at the head. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with unspoken emotions. Tyler still hadn't made eye contact with me, his gaze fixed stubbornly on the table's surface, his posture radiating reluctance and defensiveness. James cleared his throat. "Tyler, before anything else happens, you have something to say to your aunt." Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry for what I said yesterday." The apology was clearly rehearsed and reluctant, the kind parents extract from children who don't truly understand what they're apologizing for. Under normal circumstances, I might have accepted it just to ease the tension. But these weren't normal circumstances, and surface-level reconciliation wouldn't solve our deeper problems. "Tyler," I said gently, "I appreciate that you're saying sorry, but I need you to understand why your words hurt so much, do you?" He shrugged one shoulder, a quintessential teenage gesture of avoidance. "Because it was rude to call you broke, I guess." "It's not just about the words themselves," I explained. "It's about the attitude behind them. The idea that someone's financial status determines their value or success as a person. Tyler finally looked up, a flash of defiance in his eyes. But I didn't say anything that wasn't true. Everyone knows you struggle with money. It's not like it's a secret. Tyler, Melissa gasped, while James's face flushed with anger. I held up a hand to stop their interjections. It's okay, let him speak honestly. That's why we're here. I turned back to Tyler. You're right that I have less money than your parents or other members of our family. What you don't know is why. Tyler rolled his eyes slightly, clearly assuming this was going to be another lecture about career choices or the value of creative fulfillment over financial gain. Conversations he'd no doubt tuned out in the past. 3 years ago, I continued steadily, your father lost his job. That caught Tyler's attention. His head snapped up, confusion evident on his face as he looked between me and his father. What? No, he didn't. Yes, I did. James confirmed quietly. The company downsized, and I was let go with a modest severance package. We didn't tell you at the time because we didn't want you to worry. Tyler's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. But we didn't move. I didn't change schools. Nothing changed. Everything changed, James corrected him. Just not in ways you could see. We sold investments, cut back on expenses where we could, and I spent months looking for a new position. Your father was particularly concerned about having to withdraw you from Westlake Academy, I added. He knew you were thriving there and didn't want to disrupt your education. Tyler was listening now, his full attention engaged as he struggled to reconcile this new information with his understanding of his family circumstances. So, what happened? Dad got another job eventually, right? Yes, but at a significantly lower salary, James explained. Not enough to maintain our previous lifestyle and keep you at Westlake, which costs $24,000 per year. Tyler's eyes widened at the figure. $24,000? Per year? It was clear he'd never considered the actual cost of his education before. That's right, I said. And when your father realized he might have to withdraw you from Westlake, I offered a solution. I slid the folder containing the tuition receipts across the table to Tyler. He opened it hesitantly, his expression changing from confusion to shock as he scanned the documents inside. I don't understand, he said, looking up at me. These are payment receipts for my school, but they're in your name. Yes, I confirmed simply. For the past 3 years, I've been paying your tuition at Westlake Academy. The silence that followed was absolute. Tyler stared at me, then at the receipts, then at his parents, as if waiting for someone to tell him this was an elaborate joke. But how? Why? He finally managed. How is simple, I explained. I had savings, money I'd been putting aside since college for my future. As for why, I paused, choosing my words carefully. Because I love you. Because I believed in your potential and wanted you to have every opportunity to succeed. Because that's what family does. We support each other when times are tough. Tyler's face had drained of color. He looked down at the receipts again, his fingers tracing the numbers as if trying to make them less real. $24,000 per year, he murmured. For 3 years, that's $72,000, James supplied quietly. Money that should have gone toward your aunt's future, her home, her business dreams, her retirement. Tyler's head snapped up, his eyes finding mine, real emotion breaking through his carefully maintained teenage indifference. But yesterday, at dinner, when I called you, pathetic and broke, I finished for him. Yes, that's why it hurt so deeply. Not just because it was cruel, but because the reason I've been struggling financially is that I've been paying for your education. The full weight of the situation seemed to crash down on Tyler all at once. His face crumpled, a mix of shame, shock, and distress washing over his features. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked his age, not the cocky, overconfident teenager pretending to be grown, but a 16-year-old boy facing the painful consequences of his actions. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. Nobody told me. We agreed not to, James explained. Your aunt didn't want you to feel like a charity case. And he exchanged a look with Melissa. We were too proud to admit we couldn't provide for you ourselves. So all this time, Tyler said slowly, piecing it together. When Aunt Emma couldn't come on family trips, or brought homemade gifts instead of expensive ones, or drove that old car you guys sometimes laughed about. His words trailed off as realization dawned in his eyes. I could almost see him replaying every dismissive comment, every eye roll, every moment of judgment through this new lens of understanding. It wasn't because she was bad with money, he concluded, the shame in his voice palpable now. It was because she was spending her money on me. Yes, James confirmed. Money she could have, should have, been using to build her own future. Tyler looked at me directly, his eyes swimming with tears. Why would you do that? Why would you give up so much for me when I never even? Because that's what love looks like, I said simply. Love is sacrifice. Love is putting someone else's needs ahead of your own sometimes. I wanted you to have the best chance possible, even if it meant making things harder for myself. A tear slipped down Tyler's cheek, followed quickly by another. He wiped at them roughly with the back of his hand, clearly embarrassed by this display of emotion. But things are changing now, I continued gently. I can't continue paying your tuition, Tyler. I simply don't have the money anymore. Almost everything I saved is gone. The practical reality of the situation seemed to break through Tyler's emotional response, bringing him back to the immediate implications. So what happens now? Do I have to leave Westlake? James and Melissa exchanged looks before James answered. That depends on several factors. I've already called the financial aid office to see what legitimate assistance might be available. If there's enough to make it workable with our current budget, you may be able to stay. If not, he took a deep breath. Then yes, you would transfer to public school for your junior and senior years. Tyler's face fell, but I noted with some satisfaction that he didn't argue or protest. The reality of the situation was clearly sinking in. However, James continued, regardless of where you attend school, there are going to be other changes. First, your mother and I will be making significant lifestyle adjustments. We'll be selling the SUV for something more economical. No more luxury vacations or expensive electronics for a while. We need to rebuild our financial foundation responsibly. Tyler nodded, still processing. Second, James went on, you'll be getting a part-time job. 15 hours a week maximum, so it won't interfere with your studies, but enough to contribute to your own expenses. Your cell phone bill, your entertainment costs, gas money if you use the family car. Again, Tyler nodded, seemingly accepting these terms without protest. And third, James said, his tone becoming even more serious. Your mother and I will be working with your aunt to pay back every dollar she spent on your education. At this, Tyler's head snapped up in alarm. But that's so much money! How will you ever? We'll find a way, Melissa interjected firmly. Even if it takes years. What your aunt did for you, for all of us, deserves to be acknowledged and repaid. That brings me to my conditions, I said, drawing everyone's attention. I appreciate the offer to repay the tuition, and I won't refuse it. That money represents my future security. But I have other requirements as well. I turned to face Tyler directly. I need genuine respect from you, Tyler. Not just polite words when your parents are watching, but a real change in how you view people. All people, not just me, regardless of their financial status. I need you to understand that a person's bank account balance is not a measure of their worth or success. Tyler nodded solemnly. I understand. I'll do better, I promise. And I need acknowledgement from all of you. I continued looking at James and Melissa as well, that my choice to live simply while building my career is valid, that my priorities, which might be different from yours, are not wrong or inferior. Absolutely. Melissa agreed immediately. Emma, I'm deeply ashamed of any time I might have implied otherwise. Your priorities and choices are just as valid as ours. More so, actually, given the selflessness you've shown. And finally, I said, I need us to be honest with each other going forward. No more secrets, no more pretending, no more judgment. Just authentic communication and mutual respect. James reached across the table to take my hand. You have our word. This has been a painful wake-up call for all of us, but especially for me. I failed as a brother, allowing you to shoulder a burden that was never yours to carry. That ends today." A heavy silence fell over the table as we all absorbed the magnitude of what had been revealed and the changes that would follow. I looked at Tyler, who sat with his head bowed, still processing everything he'd learned. "Tyler," I said gently, "I want you to know something important. I don't regret helping you. Despite everything that's happened, I believed then and still believe now in your potential. You're smart, creative, and capable of great things. What I hope for now is that you'll use this experience to grow, to become not just successful, but kind. Not just accomplished, but compassionate." Tyler looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. When he spoke, his voice was steady, more mature than I'd ever heard from him before. "I'm so sorry, Aunt Emma. Not just for what I said yesterday, but for never seeing what you were doing for me, for taking it all for granted, for judging you when I should have been thanking you." He took a shaky breath. "I don't deserve what you've done for me, but I promise I'll work hard to become someone who does." It wasn't a movie moment with swelling music and instant transformation. It was messy and raw and real. A 16-year-old boy confronting his own privilege and entitlement for perhaps the first time, beginning the long process of becoming a more empathetic, aware young man. But it was a start. A revelation that would ripple through all our lives, changing not just our financial arrangements, but our fundamental understanding of each other. As we sat around that small table in my modest apartment, I felt something shift between us. A rebalancing of power, a restoration of dignity, the first tentative steps toward healing.